The sun was sinking low over the dry horizon, bleeding fire into the dusty skies of the western frontier. A hot wind swept across the wide street of the town, carrying grit that bit at the eyes and filled every breath with the taste of sand. But no one seemed to mind. The townsfolk had gathered in a great restless circle at the center of the square, pressing shoulder to shoulder, their boots grinding against the dirt, their laughter rolling like thunder.
At the heart of that crowd, raised upon a crude wooden platform, stood a girl. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, her dress torn and stained with travel and hardship. Stray strands of hair clung damply to her face, where tears had carved thin tracks down her cheeks. She tried to stand tall, but the weight of shame bent her shoulders until she looked more like a broken reed than a woman. The auctioneer stood beside her, a stout man with a ruddy face and eyes that gleamed with cruelty. His voice cut through the crowd like the crack of a whip. "Step right up, gentlemen. A strong young woman, fit for work or for keeping company on long nights. Who will start the bidding? Don't be shy now. She ain't cattle, but she'll do more than cattle ever will." The crowd roared with laughter, whistles piercing the air. A few men slapped their thighs, others tipped back their hats and shouted vulgarities, making sure their friends heard every word. The girl lowered her head, her voice trembling, barely louder than the creak of the wooden boards beneath her feet. "Please, don't sell me. I'm not cattle." Her plea only fanned the flames of cruelty. The laughter grew louder, crueler. A woman in the crowd sneered and spat on the ground. Men jostled each other for a better view, elbowing their way forward. One man shouted, "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll find someone to put you to use." Another added, "She looks too scrawny for a ranch. Best keep her for washing floors." The auctioneer grinned, showing yellow teeth. He raised his hand for silence. Gentlemen, let's not waste time. Who will start the bidding at $1? Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then someone barked, $1? She ain't worth a nickel." The crowd erupted once more, laughter rolling over the square like a wave. "Ha! I'll give a button off my shirt," another jeered, pulling one free and tossing it toward the platform. It bounced at the girl's feet, and she flinched as though it had been a stone. Her tears fell freely now. She tried again, her voice breaking as she looked out over the sea of mocking faces. "I can cook. I can sew. I'll work hard. Please don't treat me like this." But not a single pair of eyes in that crowd softened. They had not come to see a person. They had come to see a spectacle, something to laugh at, to fill the emptiness of their small lives with a cruelty that cost them nothing. And then, in the noise, the jeers, the shifting boots, there was one man who did not move, who did not laugh, who did not join in the sport. At the far edge of the crowd, just beyond the circle of sun that lit the square, a cowboy stood alone. His hat was pulled low, its brim shadowing a face darkened by dust and travel. His coat was worn, his boots scuffed from miles of hard road. His hands rested loose at his sides, but there was a stillness, a heaviness, that set him apart from the restless energy of the mob. He said nothing. He did not jeer. He did not look at the men around him. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, were fixed on the girl. To anyone else, she was a joke, a thing to be mocked and bartered over. But in that silent gaze, she was something more. The girl felt it, though she could not see his face clearly. Somewhere in the roar of laughter, she sensed a pair of eyes that did not laugh, that did not cut her down. For just a moment, she dared to lift her head, searching the crowd. And when she found him, When her eyes locked with the shadowed figure standing at the edge of the square, her breath caught. There was no pity there, no mockery, no cruel delight, only a quiet, steady weight, as if he were holding a secret that no one else in the world could understand. The auctioneer's voice rang out again, shattering the fragile silence. "Well then, gentlemen, are we bidding, are we not? A fine girl, able-bodied and obedient. Start at $1 or don't waste my time." The crowd roared back to life. Offers shouted, coins rattling in pockets, laughter louder than before. But the cowboy did not move. He only stood there, dust rising at his boots, the brim of his hat hiding everything but the set of his jaw and the unwavering focus of his eyes. The girl, her body trembling, felt another tear slide down her cheek. She whispered again, almost soundless, "Please." No one heard her. No one but him.
Her name was Anna. Long before the jeers of the auction yard, long before her wrists were bound with coarse rope and her dignity paraded like a cheap spectacle, she had been a daughter, just a daughter, loved by two weary parents who had carved out a small life on the edge of the prairie. Her father was a man of simple strength, his hands calloused from years of breaking earth and mending fences. Her mother was gentle, her voice a balm, her cooking the warmth that held their little household together through endless winters and blistering summers. But death is swift on the frontier, and mercy is rare. A fever stole through their home one cruel winter, and within a month, both parents were buried beneath the frozen soil, a crude wooden cross marking their resting place. Anna had been little more than a girl then, too young to stand alone, too old to be sheltered. Her only refuge had been her uncle's household. He had taken her in, not out of kindness, but out of convenience. To him, she was not family. She was another pair of hands to scrub floors, mend shirts, cook meals. And when her work was done, she was a reminder of a debt he never wanted, another mouth to feed. The man drank. He drank until his words slurred and his fists grew heavy. He drank until his debts outgrew his land, until the bottle stripped away the thin veneer of responsibility he had ever worn. And when the collectors came knocking, he offered up the only possession he believed might buy him time, the orphan girl who bore his family's name, Anna. She remembered the night with a clarity that burned. The door had crashed open, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. He had pointed to her where she stood in the kitchen, spoon in hand, and said, "Take her, she'll pay what I owe." At first she thought it a cruel jest, but the men's laughter was not the laughter of humor. It was the laughter of men who had been offered something they intended to collect. From that night forward, Anna's world was not her own. She became property of a man who smelled of whiskey and tobacco, who spent his nights in the saloon and his days cursing his luck. To him, Anna was neither wife nor kin. She was collateral. When he lost at cards, he cursed her as though she had laid the hand herself. When he drank too deep, she was the target of his bitterness, his cruelty spilling over in words that cut deeper than blows. And then the night came when his losses outstripped his lies. He had staggered into their meager dwelling, eyes red-shot, hands trembling. Anna had known before he spoke. She had seen it in his face, the hollow look of a man who had gambled everything and found himself empty. "I ain't got the coin," he muttered, staring at her as if she were not flesh, not blood,
but something else entirely. His lips twisted into a cruel grin. "But I got you." Her blood had run cold. She shook her head, whispered, "No." But he shoved her toward the door, muttering that it was better than being strung up by debt collectors. And so Anna was dragged to the marketplace, not by strangers, but by the man who had sworn to care for her when her parents' bodies were lowered into the ground. Now she stood beneath the scorching eye of the sun, her tears tracing dirt-streaked paths down her face as laughter echoed in her ears. The crowd saw nothing of her story. They saw only a broken girl, ripe for their amusement. But Anna remembered. She remembered the morning she had risen before dawn to stir a pot of soup that fed her uncle's children. She remembered neighbors who had once knocked at their door, begging for bread, for warmth, for kindness, and she had given it freely. Some of those faces were in the crowd now, their laughter sharper for the memory of their own hunger. Her voice cracked as she tried to reach them, to remind them of the humanity they had once known in her. She lifted her head, eyes searching, and spoke with trembling resolve. "I can cook. I can sew. I'll work hard. Just don't sell me like this."
But her words were met with mocking replies. "She'll work hard, all right," one man called, and the crowd erupted. "She's worth more in chores than in charm," another sneered, and laughter rose like a whip crack. Every sound was a lash against her soul. Shame pressed down heavier than the ropes at her wrists. And yet, in the midst of the cruelty, she felt again that weight of a gaze, the same quiet eyes that had steadied her in the first moment of despair. The cowboy. He had not moved. He had not spoken. But his silence was not like the other's silence. Theirs was indifference. His was something else, something heavier. Because in his memory, this scene was not new. The laughter of the crowd became another laughter, one carried from the shadows of his past. The platform became another place, years gone, when he too had stood powerless in the face of cruelty. It had been his sister then, a girl with hair the color of wheat, eyes that shone with innocence. She had been taken when he was young, too young to stop it, too weak to fight. She had been auctioned like this, paraded before men whose pockets jingled with silver and whose mouths dripped with scorn. He remembered her voice, trembling just as Anna's trembled now. "Please, I'll work. I'll do anything. Don't sell me." But they had laughed then, too. They had jeered. They had bought her. And he had never seen her again. Her absence had hollowed him, had burned itself into the marrow of his bones. He had spent years wandering with that loss, every mile carrying him farther from her, yet never freeing him from the echo of her cries. And now, here, in this sunlit square, the past had risen again, cruel and merciless. Another girl, another auction, another crowd that saw only a body, never a soul. His jaw tightened beneath the brim of his hat. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the leather of his gloves creaking under the strain. Dust swirled at his boots as the wind swept across the square, but still he did not move. Not yet. Anna on the platform felt despair close around her like a noose, but she also felt that gaze, steady, unyielding, as if it alone tethered her to the earth. She did not know who he was, she did not know why he looked at her as he did, but in that silence she felt, for the first time in years, that someone saw her. And that was enough to keep her standing when the crowd demanded she fall.
The auctioneer raised his gavel high, the wood glinting in the sunlight as though it were a weapon rather than a tool of commerce. His voice, sharp and booming, cut through the restless noise of the crowd. "Who'll give me a bid?" he barked, grinning as if he were offering fine cattle instead of a trembling girl. "We'll start at $1 silver." The words hung in the air, and then, like vultures descending upon carrion, the crowd erupted. $1? She ain't worth a cent," a man shouted, and the mob roared with laughter. "A penny's too much. I wouldn't feed her to my hogs," another sneered. "Sell her to the miners," came a third voice, harsh and cruel. "They'll get their money's worth." Anna's knees weakened beneath her. The rope that bound her wrists bit deeper into her skin as her body shook. Her eyes darted frantically, searching for even a single kind face, but none appeared. The sea of men stared back with jeering mouths and greedy eyes, not a soul willing to see her as human. Tears blurred her vision, and her voice cracked in desperation. "Please, don't sell me like this. I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll work as long as I have breath. Just don't—" But her plea was swallowed by laughter. The auctioneer smirked, raising a hand to hush the crowd only enough to press them onward. "Come now, gentlemen, surely she's worth something. Who'll start the bidding?" For a heartbeat, silence. Then heavy boots scuffed against the dirt as a wealthy rancher pushed his way to the front. His vest strained against his swollen belly, his watch chain gleaming in the sun, and his smile was a thin, cruel slash across his face. "I'll give $2, he drawled, loud enough for all to hear. The crowd exploded. "There you have it. She's his now. $2 to teach her how a wife ought to behave." Anna's chest tightened, her breath catching as though the very air betrayed her. $2. That was the price of her freedom, her dignity, her life. Her tears spilled faster now, hot tracks down her dust-streaked cheeks. The weight of despair crushed her spirit, her hope frayed to the edge of nothing. It was then, when her heart had nearly surrendered, that the silence returned. A silence different from the jeering, different from the cruel anticipation of the crowd. A silence born of stillness. The cowboy had not moved all this time, his hat brim shadowing his face, dust clinging to his worn coat. He had been a statue among the restless mob, his silence heavier than their laughter, his stillness louder than their scorn. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached into the pocket of his weather-beaten leather coat. His gloved fingers closed around the single coin he carried, his last silver dollar, the one coin he had guarded through hunger, through lonely miles on the trail, through nights when the fire burned low and his belly stayed empty. It was the promise of another day, of work, of survival. But survival had never looked like this. Not when another girl stood in the dust, bound and broken, her tears staining the ground as once his sister's tears had.
His hand trembled, not with hesitation, but with the weight of memory. And then, with quiet resolve, he stepped forward. Boot heels struck the earth, the sound sharp in the hush that spread. Dust rose with every step, curling around him like a veil. The crowd parted slightly, their laughter faltering, confusion flickering across their faces. Without a word, he placed the coin upon the auctioneer's table. It landed with a dull ring, unimpressive, almost pitiful against the polished wood. $1, nothing more. For the space of a breath, silence reigned. And then the laughter returned, louder than before, meaner than before. $1, someone barked, doubling over with mirth. That ragged cowpoke thinks he can buy her? Another jeered. Save your coin for whiskey, boy, you'll need it. The rancher who had bid $2 sneered openly, his lip curling.
Is this some kind of joke? A man like him couldn't keep a dog fed, let alone a woman. The crowd roared approval, cruel and merciless. They mocked his tattered coat, his dust-caked boots, the emptiness of his pockets. To them, he was nothing, a drifter, a pauper, a fool. But the cowboy did not look at them. He did not flinch. His gaze never wavered from Anna. And in that gaze, she saw no ridicule, no hunger, no cruelty. Only a quiet, steady weight that reached into the hollow of her despair and placed something there she had not felt in years. Hope. The auctioneer, his smile faltering for the first time, tapped his gavel against his palm. $1, is it? We have 2 on the table already. I said 1. The cowboy's voice broke the air. It was the first sound he had made, and it carried through the square like a rifle shot. Low, steady, final. The crowd murmured, surprised by the sound of it, unsettled by its certainty. The auctioneer blinked, then glanced between the wealthy rancher's sneer and the single silver dollar gleaming faintly in the dust. He licked his lips, uncertain. And then, as though savoring the cruelty, he raised his gavel high. "Sold!" he declared, voice booming across the marketplace. "Sold to the cowboy with $1. The gavel cracked against the wood, sharp as thunder, final as judgment. The crowd erupted, not in applause, not in outrage, but in mocking delight. $1! That's all she's worth! She's his now, the pauper's bride! God help her!" Anna's heart pounded in her chest, confusion and disbelief tangling with the remnants of her despair. She stared at him, this silent figure who had given away his last coin for her. She could not understand it. She could scarcely believe it. And yet, in the storm of laughter, in the gale of ridicule, he stood unshaken. The cowboy lifted his head, eyes meeting hers across the platform. And in that moment, the noise of the crowd faded into nothing.
The gavel's cracks still echoed in Anna's ears as rough hands untied the rope that bound her wrists. The coarse hemp left angry red grooves in her skin, her arms trembling as blood rushed back through veins that had been starved of freedom. She stumbled when they shoved her forward, and for a moment she thought she might collapse entirely into the dirt. But then she saw him. The cowboy was already there, silent as ever, his face hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. He didn't reach for her with the arrogance of ownership, nor with the cruelty of one who thought he'd won a prize. Instead, he simply shrugged the dust-stained coat from his shoulders and placed it gently across hers. It was rough and smelled faintly of leather, smoke, and the long miles of the trail. But to Anna, it felt like the first shield she'd had in years. Her lips parted, her voice raw with disbelief. Why did you do this?" she whispered, hardly daring to let the words leave her mouth. He said nothing, not a word, only turned, took the reins of a lean, road-worn horse, and began walking out of the market square. Behind them, the mob erupted again. "Look at that! A whole woman for $1! Poor fool! He'll starve with her before winter's out! Pauper marries pauper! What a match!" Their laughter followed like jeering crows, circling above, feeding on humiliation. Anna lowered her head, clutching the coat tighter around herself, her cheeks burning with shame. Every step out of the square was a battle against the weight of their scorn. And yet, with every step, distance grew. The market noise faded, swallowed by the empty streets of the town. By the time they reached the edge where wooden buildings gave way to scrubland, only the faint echo of laughter remained, carried on the wind. The cowboy walked ahead in silence, his stride steady, never turning to see if she followed. Anna stumbled after him, her legs unsteady from exhaustion, her throat dry with dust. Her heart warred within her chest, gratitude for her release, humiliation at the spectacle, confusion over why this stranger had done such a thing. Was she truly better off, or had she only been sold from one cage into another? The sun sagged lower in the sky, casting the land in long gold shadows. Heat gave way to chill, and Anna shivered beneath the too large coat. Once she stumbled over a rock and nearly fell to her knees, but the cowboy slowed, glancing briefly back. Without a word, he extended the leather canteen from his side. She accepted it hesitantly. The water was lukewarm, tasting of tin and dust, but it soothed the fire in her throat. She looked up at him, searching his shadowed face for answers, but he had already turned forward again.
A mile further, when her stomach growled loudly in the silence, he reached into his saddlebag and produced a crust of bread, small, hard, the last of whatever rations he carried. He broke it in half, handed her the larger piece, and kept only a fragment for himself. Anna stared at the bread in her palm, then at him. "This is yours," she murmured. He said nothing, chewing slowly on his share, gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun fell, and the land grew dim. Coyotes howled from the distant hills as the first stars blinked awake above. When darkness deepened, he led the horse off the trail to a hollow where sagebrush broke the wind. There, with practiced hands, he gathered wood, struck flint, and coaxed a small fire to life. Anna sank down beside the warmth, exhaustion weighing her body like chains. She pulled the coat tighter around her, watching the flames lick upward, orange and gold against the black night. For the first time since the square, she dared speak. "You could have bought food," she whispered, eyes fixed on the fire. "You could have bought a bed. You could have kept walking and left me there, but you bought me instead." The words trembled, heavy with both gratitude and shame. She braced herself for silence, or worse, a cruel reminder that she belonged to him now. Instead, after a long moment, his voice came, low, rough, honest. "No one should be sold." The fire popped softly, filling the silence that followed. Anna turned her head slowly, staring at him across the flames. His eyes were dark beneath the brim of his hat, unreadable, yet carrying a weight that struck something deep within her chest. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled, the night whispered, and the wide, endless sky stretched above them. At last, Anna lay back on the hard ground, clutching the coat to her chest. For the first time since years, tears slipped from her eyes, not in despair, but in something she could not yet name. Relief, perhaps, or the fragile seed of hope. And beside her, the cowboy sat motionless, staring into the fire with memories burning in his silence.
The dawn broke cold and gray, streaks of pale light cutting through the horizon as the cowboy and Anna pressed on. They had walked for days now, leaving the town and its jeering voices far behind. Dust clung to their boots, the horse's ribs showed lean beneath its hide, and hunger gnawed at them both. Yet each mile carried them further from chains, from the clamor of the auction block, from the shame of the square. By the fifth night, the land changed. Low hills rose against the skyline, scattered with twisted oaks and patches of wild grass. It was here, at the edge of an old creek bed, that the cowboy stopped. Ahead lay the sagging outline of a house, a forgotten ranch, its timbers grayed and weather-worn, its fences broken where cattle once roamed. "This place," he murmured at last, the first words he had spoken in hours. His voice was hoarse, as if unused. "I was meant to work here, before. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. Anna looked at the ranch and felt the silence within its walls, the way the windows stared hollow and empty at the land, as though it too had been abandoned to sorrow. Still, he pushed the door open, and together they stepped inside. Dust swirled in the air, stirred by their boots. The hearth was cold, stones cracked, but the cowboy knelt anyway, gathering splinters and broken boards from collapsed furniture. Sparks leapt from his flint, and before long, flames licked the fireplace once more, casting warmth into the hollow room. Anna stood near the glow, clutching the coat around her shoulders. The fire's heat touched her skin, and for the first time in years she did not feel like prey or chattel or a discarded thing. For the first time she felt the faint stirrings of safety. The cowboy unrolled a threadbare blanket from his pack, setting it by the fire. "It's not much," he said, his eyes lowering, "but it'll keep the cold off." Anna touched the blanket as though it were fine velvet. "It's more than I've ever been given." She sat, curling close to the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. And there, beneath the flicker of light, something soft broke through her guarded voice. "I'm not worth your last dollar," she whispered, her throat tightening. The cowboy turned his head, meeting her eyes across the fire. His gaze was steady, carrying no pity, only quiet conviction. "You're worth more than every dollar I'll ever earn." Anna felt the words pierce her like an arrow, not with pain, but with something far stranger, something she had forgotten existed. Hope. That night, as the wind howled against the old boards, Anna lay wrapped in the blanket, the fire painting her cheeks with warmth. For the first time in memory, she slept without chains biting into her wrists, without fear of being dragged from her bed, without the weight of humiliation pressing her chest. And while she slept, the cowboy kept watch. He sat with his back against the wall, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes never straying far from the shadows beyond the firelight. Danger still prowled the land, men who might seek to reclaim what they thought was theirs, hunger that could drive even neighbors to cruelty, the lawless night itself. But within him something stirred too. For years he had carried silence like armor, burying memories of a sister lost to the same cruelty he had witnessed in the square. Now, watching Anna breathe softly in untroubled sleep, he felt that silence shift, crack. The fire glowed in his eyes, and with it came something he thought he had buried forever: belief that not all was lost.
Morning came bright and clear, sunlight spilling through broken shutters. Anna woke to the smell of smoke and the faint chirp of birdsong outside. For a moment she did not remember where she was. She only knew she was warm, she was alive, and she was free. Rising, she stepped carefully across the warped boards and pushed open the door. The prairie stretched wide before her, fields bathed in golden light, brass waving in the morning breeze. She stood in the doorway, hair lifting in the wind, the coat loose around her shoulders, her bare feet cool against the wood. She closed her eyes and breathed. Behind her, boots scuffed. She turned, and there he was, leading the horse out of the stable ruins. His hat shaded his face, but when he glanced up at her, their eyes met. For a heartbeat, no words passed. They did not need them. There was no vow, no declaration, no promise spoken aloud. Only the quiet understanding that hung between them. That the road ahead would be long, perhaps perilous, but from this day forward, they would not walk it alone. Anna's lips trembled, curving into the smallest of smiles, fragile yet radiant with something new. And the cowboy, silent as ever, tipped his hat. The morning sun rose higher, burning the mist from the fields. Together they stepped down into the light, two souls scarred by loss, yet bound now by something stronger than chains, stronger than fear, by choice, by freedom, by the fragile, flickering spark of hope reborn.